Welcome, everyone, and thank you for coming to the Academy's 6th annual Shark Tank session. I would like to thank the RSNA for enabling us to host both live and streaming virtually today. I'm going to start with just a quick overview of who we are. The Academy, first, has been around since 1995, and we advocate for federal funding for medical imaging research, primarily at NIH, but across government agencies. And you'll see here what our membership consists of: advocacy organizations, patient advocacy organizations, imaging societies, academic radiology departments, and industry. Our strongest advocates, our most passionate advocates, are part of our Academy Council of Early Career Investigators in Imaging. And it was 6 years ago where a group of those members, early career investigators, pre-R01, came to us and said, can we think of creative ways to identify sources of funding that are not NIH? And that's really all we had done within the Academy is advocate for NIH and other government agencies. So we started to think about and talk to them about how we could do that. And they wanted to identify sources outside of NIH, and they talked about venture capitalists and industry. And they wanted it to not be a lecture or really something that would be less serious. They wanted it to be really interactive and fun, and that is how the Shark Tank session was born. So what we do every year is we ask every academic chair to nominate someone from within their department to pitch an idea, someone who's never done it before, who is interested in learning how to speak about their research in a way that is appealing to industry, to academia, and venture capitalists. And you'll see here the institutions that have participated so far over the past 5 years. And we continue to grow this program. It's kind of exciting because every year we have more and more nominations, more interests. We are hoping to eventually offer money as a reward. We're not quite there yet because we're a poor, scrappy nonprofit organization, but we will get there, I hope. So in the meantime, we have fun awards that we will be giving out today. So the three pitchers that you'll hear from today were chosen amongst a panel of experts that you see here that will introduce themselves. And we look forward to your participation as well. I believe that Scott, at the end of all of the pitching, will ask for questions from the audience, so please stand up and engage as much as you can or are comfortable doing so. With that, I would like to introduce Academy President, Dr. Mitch Schnall. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks, Renee, and I want to thank our pitchers who will be speaking today, as well as my fellow panelists who will be part of the really what really is a mock study section in a different context. You might ask, as Renee pointed out, why the Academy got engaged in this, and this is all part of our effort to try to help our community develop avenues of research funding. And anyone who's been funded researcher for a period of time, they recognize that the idea of writing a grant is really a marketing exercise. You're marketing your idea, you're marketing your science to a study section. And at some point, all you care about is what that study section thinks and how they react. And your job is to get that study section to react the way you want. And it's really no different, just the context, the considerations and everything is different in a venture context than it would be in a traditional NIH context. So this is really a mock study section. This is for people to learn how people in the venture world react to pitches, how the pitches are critiqued, and how they're evaluated so that we can be more effective as a community in trying to get resources for our research through venture and other opportunities and bring them to market. So with that, I'll introduce our MC, Scott Penner, who's a partner at Eversheds Sutherland, who will take it from here. Scott?
Great. Well, thank you very much. Mitch and also Renee for having all of us here and for putting together this panel and the ability to pitch for the Shark Tank. My name is Scott Penner. I am a partner at Eversheds Sutherland. My practice is focused on intellectual property, particularly in the area of both protecting your assets and in asserting your assets and turning them into licensing revenue streams. So a lot of what I do is helping companies that are in the pre-IPO stage and who have their ideas try and get the protections that they need for the ideas that you're about to hear pitched at the presentation today. And I wanted to just as a reminder, so for those who have attended in the past, what we are judging here is not necessarily what idea is the best idea or the most marketable idea or the idea that would receive the most likelihood of getting venture capital funding. What we are judging here on the panel is the pitch itself. So the presentation, the ability to answer questions on your feet, the language that is used, whether or not you've put together the pitch that a VC would want to hear. Those are the types of things that we're looking for. So at the end of the day, when we grant our award, please remember that we're not passing judgment on what the best idea is, just the training and the ability to give the pitch as it is. And so with that, let me pass it off to the rest of the panel to introduce themselves, starting with Susan Harris.
Hi, I'm Susan Harris. I lead the research teams at General Electric Healthcare for ultrasound and for life care solutions. We set the strategy and then also find the partners that we want to work with for product development and clinical evidence generation.
Good afternoon. I'm Kelsey Tsai. I'm an investor at the Blue Venture Fund. The Blue Venture Fund invests on behalf of the BlueCross BlueShield Association in 35 Blue Plan entities across the U.S. We look for things that are strategically relevant to them. This includes healthcare services, healthcare data, technology, and operations. And the third bucket, which is why we're here today, is clinical, so things that touch upon the practice of medicine. We're currently operating out of our fourth fund and have upwards of $900 million assets under management.
Thank you. I'm Chip Truwit. I'm a recovering radiologist, having practiced for 30-odd years, and was the chair at Hennepin County Medical Center in Minneapolis, and I am the extinguished professor at the University of Minnesota. I also work for Philips now as a medical officer, and in that role, I get to see an awful lot of new technologies, and some from within, some from without. And so I see pitches like these coming up quite frequently, and part of my job at Philips is to make sure that the new ideas stay within the goalposts of what's needed clinically, such as we don't need another folding waterbed and we don't need an electric fork, but we need something that will improve outcomes for patients and stuff. So thanks very much for the Academy for inviting me.
All right, and with that, and without further ado, we'd like to bring up our first pitcher here in the Shark Tank, which is Dr. Valeria Makiva from Emory. And Dr. Makiva will be joined by Dr. Peter Harry for questions afterwards.
Let's see. Just click next. One more. All right. I'm a physician with a molecular biology degree from Yale University. My co-founders are informatics leaders at Emory. Collectively, we've helped grow and sell 2 companies. Our experience is our strength. Our team has launched 7 applications. What if there was a way to catch cancer earlier? What if you're diagnosed with metastatic disease tomorrow? You had a chest x-ray that showed a nodule 2 years ago, but everyone missed it. What if there was an automated software that alerted your doctor and you got treatment 2 years sooner? Radiologists recommend follow-up to catch early cancer. Too often, that follow-up isn't done. This year, 2021, is special. A new national guidance requires that hospitals track follow-up exams with technology. The problem is there's a gap. We have 6,000 hospitals in the US. Fewer than 30 track follow-up. None we know of automated. Why?
Solutions are manual, where 4 to 5 people review records, so they're error-prone and slow. Worse, some solutions need a multi-million-dollar, very specific EMR first, meaning they're not vendor neutral. Remember how I said too often, follow-up isn't done? This is real data from a medium-sized academic center over 1 year. Most MR and CT aren't followed up. Everyone in this room is that patient. Scary, right? Switching gears to the hospital CFOs in the room. You lose $7 million every year. You want that in-house at your hospital instead of across the street. Nationally, that's $2.3 billion. For insurance like BlueCross, BlueShield, that exam costs $300 now, and it saves 6 figures when your patient doesn't get late-stage cancer. This is a radiology report. Our deep neural net and NLP scan it, and Shield finds your would-be cancer. Shield adds you to our tracking list. Our neural net feeds that info into our software architecture. Our architecture is our rare diamond, and how we're already integrating with Epic and Cerner, the 2 EMRs with the largest market shares. Radiology orders flow from the EMR through the interface engine to the radiology reporting system. Reports flow back the same way. Any EMR, any radiology reporting system. That's vendor neutral. We catch what we need at the interface and make a tracking list. When Shield says a patient needs imaging, we notify their provider through EMR or email. Our software architecture is a technical breakthrough. We have patented and protected that technical breakthrough because everyone has AI. We have a rare diamond. Shield has 2 innovations, the architecture that achieves automation and vendor neutrality, and the algorithm that finds your cancer. Our patent protects our architecture. We have competitive advantages. We've done market analysis, and we think there's a blue ocean here. We're fully automated. No manual entry or human bias. We're vendor neutral. Any system, big or small, Epic or Cerner, PowerScribe or transcriptionists can use Shield. We track imaging, procedures, and clinic visits, recouping more for the hospital. We're priced to grow and fast because we don't need human navigators. The market is large, and the penetration of that market is small. We can address the rest of this pie because we have the innovation making it possible. Shield makes a 6-figure profit with 5 customers. Given the market size, getting 5 is expected. We've completed these milestones to get us to Emory deployment with patent protection. Shark Tank resources are needed to become fully cloud-based. We want to go from the software model, which needs major infrastructure, to software as a service, which unlocks our market. We want to be a turnkey solution. We have hustle. Once cloud-based, we have customers lined up. 2 academic medical centers, 1 on the east and 1 on the west coast, and 2 private groups. That's penetration in academic and private sectors. Our ask is investment from Shark Tank to become cloud-based and become a turnkey solution. And in exchange, we offer 20% share of our company. The problem is radiology reports contain results that matter, but most aren't acted on because no one we know of has automated it. We figure out which results matter to patients, what risk matters to providers, and what money matters to hospitals and insurance. You are a patient. Imagine your follow-up is missed. Thank you very much. I will now take questions.
Can you talk a little bit about what the integration looks like and how long it takes at each institution?
Yes. So for integration, we can message through the EMR or we can message through email. So that's one of the components of vendor neutrality. It's one of the breakthroughs in our architecture. And when we integrate, we can process an entire day's worth of data, an entire day's worth of ORUs in 1 minute and 30 seconds.
So the integration is you have HL7 messages going back and forth. You have ADT feeds and ORMs that are ordering all your procedures and all your clinic visits. We are monitoring the hospital's HL7 feed at all times. So when the ORM comes across for your report or comes across for the order, and then we send the ORU back because we're sending it back to them as the report, it's monitoring that. It then asks the doctor, do you want to order this? If they say yes, we now have that ORM We don't have to ever bother them again because they already ordered it. And when our ORU comes back again to say we've reported on it, they don't get bothered again. So it actually, because of the automation and because we're always listening to the HL7, we don't have to bother them unless they decide not to order it. And then we say, did you not want to, or is there a reason you didn't want to?
So one of the questions I like to ask to just understand the competitive landscape is why now? So what barriers kind of existed in the past, and why hasn't this been done in the past? And why do you think now's the time?
That's a great question. And I actually have an appendix slide to answer that. All right, so this is a detailed comparison to the competition. And the problem is that what's available isn't great. Some of the reasons for that in the past is that the vendor neutrality and automation wasn't possible. Human navigators are needed in each of these cases. The other reason for the impetus to do this now, this year, is because the ACR, which is a major society in radiology, it has created an expert panel to create follow-up measures requiring hospitals to track follow-up exams. So it's particularly relevant both from the policy space and from the technological space. That's why now and why us. Now, I would like to talk about the competition. So, some of the other startups require referring providers to download an app. And you get these automated robot phone calls, and it's really horribly abysmal, in my opinion. So the chance of providers using that app already is already low. And if adoption was good, we wouldn't have that problem in the first place. That's number one. Number two, for other competitors, you have to have a certain dictation software or an EMR already, and that's where the technical innovation comes through. For these other vendors, they're an add-on solution and an added cost. With Shield, it doesn't matter if you have a transcriptionist, it still works. So, to summarize, policy and technology.
Yeah. And to furthermore, just very briefly, the deep neural network, instead of just using simple natural language processing, we're using an actual deep neural network to do this, and that provides us the better the accuracy and the easier way to do the natural language processing we're doing. And it also just took, we at Emory also invented a Dicom listening device, and since once we had the Dicom listening device, we immediately went, why can't we do HL7? So it was, the problem being that we've been tasked with doing this for years, but nobody could do it, and then us finally getting the technology together to do it ourselves.
Thanks. I have a series of questions, but I'll start with the first one, which, as you pointed out, there's competition in the field, and there's a bunch of companies that have already raised a fair amount of money in this field. This is a field that is tackling whether the radiologist wants to own an end-to-end solution or just wants to read the film. And many of us in the field have been begging that radiology do for the rest of radiology what we do for mammography, which is we own the whole deal from end to end. Your solution solves if a finding is discovered. It doesn't address AI of if a finding is missed. So you're only tackling half of the solution in that regard, which is a huge problem. I'm not denying that. I'm just thinking we're supposed to be thinking about what would a VC say to you. And so the VC would say, what do you say about the fact that there's already competition with funding? Your patent is filed in 21, so others probably have IP already that you're going to have to navigate. How are we going to get to an end here what a VC should put money into this?
I have a couple of points on that. First, I'd like to address the question related to what is this going to do? Where there are other people who are trying to get radiology to take ownership, but radiologists, it's not within their scope of practice. So radiologists are not able to manage patients, which is why follow-up clinics have been proposed but are not actually implemented. And I think that gets to your first point. What I find most exciting about Shield, about this solution, is that it opens that black box. So of how often we recommend follow-up and how often that follow-up can turn into cancer. And that saves lives. And that impacts the field through updated clinical guidelines based on evidence, which we do not have right now.
So just to furthermore, yes, there are people out there doing it. The difference is, and I understand that you're saying that there's a diagnostic, that you're saying it doesn't solve the diagnostic question. That's true. Mm-hmm. But one of the things this does is you can't, no product is a turnkey solution for everything. So what we're trying to solve is not the diagnostic solution, which to be perfectly frank, I don't care what algorithm is out there right now. They aren't all that. They aren't good enough. None of them are. And they're all FDA regulated. So we'd have to come out with an algorithm. If you want to catch all results, we'd have to have a product that has an algorithm for every single possible diagnosis, which would be FDA regulated and require us to change every single one. It's not possible. But so what we decided at Emory was, first off, we decided we already own this. We're radiologists. We made the finding. I told somebody about it, it's already mine, and I already own it. And I'm no way trying to skirt that. But what we're trying to say is, since we made this finding, because we care about patients, and because we're not out there being the front line to the patient care, this is our attempt to say we are here, and we're trying to help you because we care about patients just as much as you do. That's what we think.
So I want to ask a question about how you're managing, I'll call it the last mile problem. You know, we live in a complex environment where we have teams of physicians working together. Often these findings are not in the bailiwick of the physician who may have ordered the exam. Sometimes a physician's name shows up on an order because they're the primary when a specialist really ordered. How do you make sure you're getting this to the message to the right person? And how do you make sure that this person actually is ready to be to act on it? Since in a lot of cases we have messages jumbling up, people not getting messages. How do you solve the last mile problem?
So one of the ways we're doing this is we're trying to integrate with EMRs now. So you either get the message through the EMR, and so you're already there and can order it, or what we're trying to do with the EMRs we're integrating with, that you can order it immediately, or at least say, it's not my decision, I don't want to order this. And to be fair, like, because one of the things we do, keep talking about imaging findings. One of the things, I'm a body radiologist. If I find a papillary mass in the urinary bladder and I say, you may want to suggest urology consult with cystoscopy, no other product does this. You would then be in the EMR to be able to order a urology consult and let the urologist see that patient. Let them decide if it needs cystoscopy and biopsy. But you're also keeping it in your hospital. So at that point, you're trying to keep the money inside. So the urologist at your institution is seeing them, and the patient isn't going somewhere else. I realize money isn't everything, but when you're pitching to a venture capitalist, it can be.
I'd also like to add about out-of-system providers, because I think that might be something that you were getting at. And we will work really well for the majority of EMRs, and especially since we integrate with Cerner and Epic, which are 56% of the EMR market. And providers with ordering privileges, they have to provide an email address according to our clinical decision support manager protocols and patient portal. And Shield would send them an email with a secure link. So in that aspect, we are at least as good as the competition.
The other competition requires you have a phone number so they can call you. I can tell you from trying to set up things at our institution, we don't even have an accurate phone number from every single person who orders at our institution. And sometimes they're an answering machine, yes, an answering machine that is full. And so you can't even leave critical results. So we're at least equal, like she said, to our competitors. But in this case, I think we're a little better.
Yeah.
So I have a couple of quick questions for you.
And you shall have quick answers.
Hopefully they're quick answers. So the first is, and you mentioned that it was patented. Now, I noticed that you had on the slide, I think it said 2021. So it's not patented yet. It's patent pending, correct?
Provisional patent filed.
A provisional patent has been filed.
Correct.
Okay. So you have not yet even sought a non-provisional patent to actually turn this into an actual patent itself?
Our timeline is to seek that patent in January, which is 1 year. So there's a 1 year timeline between provisional filing and final patent filing. I will also say that most IP in the US is protected through trade secrets related to AI. And because the Patent Office doesn't keep up with AI, we protect our neural nets with NDAs and restrictive licenses. On top of that, we also filed a provisional patent on our architecture because that's the technical breakthrough. And we did that after extensive review by Emory's legal team because we might not be able to keep that secret with multiple customers.
Okay. You mentioned that there was, once you hit 5 customers, you'd turn a profit, but you didn't discuss the pricing model. So exactly how is it that you plan on pricing this to reach the profitability after 5 customers?
That's a good question. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a per study model. So what that means is that at a place like Emory, we're offering a subscription-based model, and this is an example of a price that we gave here. Here we go. So this is an example of a price what we're charging for a medium-sized academic medical center, which we put at $200,000 per year. So with a 1.1 million study volume at Emory, then that would be 18 cents per study. If there was a smaller hospital that wanted to negotiate aggressively, then we can say we will go in at risk with them because then we'd be able to consider that. But neither we nor anybody else would get a 20-bed hospital in that way, but it's not a clean model. And after a time limit that we show we work, then we would ask for a flat fee. I'm also happy to go over this with you.
And then the last question is, you asked for a 20% stake, but you didn't say how much you were asking for. So what is the ask?
That's a good question. So for a 20% share in our company, we asked for a 20% investment in our company's value, which would be approximately $3 million. We would welcome a lower investment for an equivalent company share. And the reason that we offer that is because we value our company at $18.6 million. And to calculate a valuation in the startup world in software, you multiply revenue by a multiple based on growth. And the multiple based on common business practices is 50% increase in growth. That's 12. That's the multiple. We anticipate 200% growth with 5 customers over the next 1 to 2 years.
One of the benefits is being able to detect cancer earlier, which is great for the patient, the provider, and the payer.
Just to clear up, we're not detecting cancer. What we're saying is that the
Screening.
radiologist detected cancer. We're making sure that if we thought it needed follow-up, that it's being followed. So it may turn out to be nothing, but we want to make sure that patient goes, oh, I'm good, and then 5 years later, it is cancer. I just want to make sure everyone understands that.
Yep, earlier kind of monitoring. And how, so when you think about kind of outcomes, are you kind of tracking that, looking into selling into the value proposition for the hospital system? I imagine that could be something
that is a
that comes to
great
mind.
question. And the reason is when you have out results, so let's say that patient says, hey, we need a biopsy, and they go to get a biopsy. That pathology result comes back as an ORU. Guess what ORU is? It's an HL7 message. Guess what Shield is tracking? It's an HL7 message. We just automatically said this follow-up has this gold standard result, and we now know what we're doing.
Yeah, I would also like to add that the majority of the interest in this value proposition, as you described, will be in increasing and retaining these very well-compensated CPTs. So the hospital paid for it. If they want to outsource that to another company, that's their decision. If they want to do nothing and miss 75% of follow-ups, that's their decision too.
And to be honest, we don't just have to do that. If you're supposed to get your colonoscopy every 5 years, that's an order. We're following that too. If you don't get your colonoscopy done, we're going to tell the doctor, hey, you need to follow up with this patient. So we're not just always radiology results. This has growth. It's not built into the system yet, but this system has growth and application way beyond what we're talking about.
I have a final question here. I appreciate we've had 2 questions about the IP landscape, and you've spent a lot of time talking about it. My estimation is that this is not an IP play at all, that you really don't have much of a chance to get a patent that's worth anything in this field. It's too easy to get around because there's too many steps involved. However, I think you're in a wonderful position for a land grab, which means get out there, get customers, become the defining participant in this. And so what I would suggest we think about, if it's a land grab, is I asked about the AI for detection. Maybe you should be coupling with AI companies so that there's a per-click model. Every time they do something and they find something, you get a per-click of doing your work.
And that makes great sense.
Also,
That does.
And are you planning on billing sites per click or by site license? How are you going to do that? If it's a site license, it gets up to a certain barrier that chiefs and vice presidents all have to deal with to sign off on.
So one of the best ways to do that is model other companies use. They say, hey, we estimate that you're doing this many reports or this is how often you're going to use it. There are 2 models you can do that. Hey, you went over your limit, I'm charging you X money right now. The other way to do it, which is what I would suggest, is, hey, you went over your limit for the next year, let's now renegotiate. We now know that your limit has moved up because you've gotten you've gotten busier. And I would suggest that way. It's more friendly to the companies. It allows them to then say to their operational expenses, we need to increase this over the next year, as opposed to say, well, you did it, you owe us money now.
All right, well, thank you guys very much. We appreciate your time. And the judges will mark our scorecards. And in the meantime, if we could have the second presenter come up, which is Dr. Agata Exner from Case Western Reserve University. And for questions, Dr. Exner will be joined by Dr. Biselian.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Hello, Sharks. I'm Agata Exner. and I'm a professor of radiology and a biomedical engineer, and together with my co-founders, we are EchoSight, and I'm excited to tell you about seeing more with nanobubbles. Our ask is a strategic partnership to help us get to an IND submission so that we can start an initial pilot clinical trial with our technology. So we are developing the first nanoscale-based cancer cell targeted ultrasound contrast agent for prostate cancer imaging. Why do we want to do this? So as some of you may already know, there are over 1 million prostate biopsies per year in the United States, and almost all of them right now include transrectal ultrasound. However, because of poor soft tissue contrast, this still limits tumor visualization. So you cannot use the imaging modality that's already on board to see the tumors or see areas of interest to biopsy. One can do that with the technology that we have developed, which is the contrast agent. So our contrast agent will specifically hone to cancer cells which express the prostate-specific membrane antigen. While there, this will highlight the tumor and serve as a real-time beacon for the urologist or radiologist to do the biopsy. This will enable truly guided biopsies using conventional truss with the same hardware and the same software that's already available. And looking ahead, we can make our technology a platform technology and expand to ultrasound-mediated theranostics. There's still a significant unmet need to improve routine truss biopsies. Despite the advancements that have occurred, most biopsies are still unguided, and the tumors are easily missed because biopsy samples less than 1% of the prostate gland. This results in about a 40% false negative rate for patients, leads to repeat biopsies, increased complication risks, and increased healthcare costs. So our patented PSMA-targeted nanobubble makes prostate cancer easier to detect and to treat. How do we do this? So the nanobubble, compared to the conventional microbubbles, which are about the size of a red blood cell, the nanobubble is about 10 times smaller, and its small nanomedicine-based footprint allows it to escape the leaky tumor vasculature and attach itself directly to the cancer cells and the biomarkers expressed on its surface. The bubbles are taken up into the cell, and once in there, they're stabilized for over 30 minutes to allow for a very large time window where there's strong signal and visualization of the tumor, allowing for whatever procedure is necessary. And by themselves, the particles are very innocuous. They do really nothing. But when combined with a very specific ultrasound set of parameters, they can be forced to cavitate or implode. And those very localized specific implosions can lead to apoptosis of cancer cells. Our technology is supported by over 10 years of research and over $5 million in grant funding. We have shown broad applications starting with mice, and now we've scaled up to 2 different large animal models. We've piloted these bubbles in the rabbit prostate cancer model. So you can see here with B-mode ultrasound, I'll move my pointer here, as well as MR, with these imaging modalities, the tumor is not visible, but when you look at the parametric map created by the nanobubbles, the tumor becomes much more visible, and you can compare that to the growth pathology here. With commercial microbubbles, they quite miss the mark. We've also recently scaled up our technology to a canine model. So these are 25-pound beagles, where you can see significant signal in the tumor and very little signal in the normal prostate background. So our SNR is quite excellent. We think that the PSMA nanobubbles create an opportunity to accurately and cost-effectively diagnose prostate cancer patients. We also think that we can be a complementary technology to multiparametric MRI, which is now becoming the state of the field, where this technology is available. However, we can also serve as a low-cost alternative where MRI is not feasible. So really, I think that the PSMA nanobubbles can enable highly specific guided biopsies with trust in the United States and worldwide. They can be an effective tool for both urologists and radiologists to identify regions of interest to biopsy, and they have potential for non-invasive diagnosis down the road. Our market opportunity is about $450 million. Based on the 1.3 million prostate biopsies, initial biopsies, and a cost of the nanobubbles of about $300. If we add on the rebiopsies, that's an additional $63 million. But more importantly, we also can generate significant healthcare cost savings because the reduction in repeat biopsies is projected to reduce costs by over $2 billion. We are seeking a strategic partnership for development of a regulatory IND package to evaluate the PSMA nanobubbles in a pilot clinical trial. And we're also interested in partnering with a large-scale cGMP manufacturing partner. You can see in the chart that we've laid out here that we hope to achieve these goals in 4 years. So hopefully I've tempted you with the interesting things that PSMA nanobubbles have the potential to do, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks so much for the presentation. I guess one of the questions that I have is just regarding provider adoption. Can you kind of speak to the willingness of providers to adopt this and why it would be done over standard of care and kind of what level of evidence would be needed there?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So we've done significant market research with mostly urologists right now, although some radiologists as well. And most of the urologists want to keep biopsies in urology. When MRI is introduced, those biopsies end up going to radiology, which is great. But there's a bit of a turf war, right? So in terms of urology adoption, because the workflow is completely the same, the only thing they have to do is introduce an IV and introduce this contrast agent, they're very willing to adopt it. And most of the market research that we've done indicates that if they can keep it in the office, keep it in their practice, that's a much more efficient and effective and preferred way to go.
Yeah, I think to add to that is that these bubbles, once they're introduced IV, are really begin to light up these tumors within minutes. So it doesn't really prolong the workflow either.
Thank you. I liked your presentation, and I liked the first one as well. Anyhow, I liked your presentation, and I think you've hit on, with this question, that you're sitting on the fence here between, are we going to put a needle in the bubble of MR, the whole hope of MR-guided multiparametric imaging, and say there's a simpler way to do this, and the heck with radiology, to put it in the extreme, or are we just going to try to work our way in or something? And I think we all understand, at least in radiology, that if the urologist has a way to do this completely, this will be the way that they will choose because it's so simple. But at the end of the day, the answer is what's better for patients. And that's the only thing that should dictate what we do. But as an investor, I can see that if indeed your process works, people will have access pretty quickly. So how do you're here raising money from radiologists to say, I'm going to put an end to radiology's involvement?
That's an excellent point. So here's the thing. Here's where we're heading. So PSMA has a very good track record in being correlated with aggressive disease and tumor progression. And so the hope is that eventually we can use transrectal ultrasound, transabdominal ultrasound to image and detect these tumors without the need for biopsy. So I think that there is a clear potential to keep this within radiology, because if you don't need to take it for a biopsy, it can stay within imaging. So I think there's a lot of potential. And then in terms of extending that, the therapeutic aspect of it, I think could also be done in radiology and interventional radiology. We've started to work with companies who do transrectal HIFU, and they're very interested in using the bubbles for guidance of their therapies as well, and for serving as cavitation nuclei to reduce the energy that they need to cause the ablation of the tissue. So I think those can be done in radiology practices as well. So.
You raised this question about HIFU, and I put that off because leaving nanobubbles there, they will explode in HIFU. So
all right, yes.
People have talked about using it to take a clot out in the MCA with the explosion that would occur. How are you going to deal with that in this scenario?
Yeah, so when they're left alone with imaging parameters, they do nothing. When the energy is a bit higher, they implode. And the way that we deal with that is that these bubbles are only localized in the cancer cells that are expressing the PSMA biomarker. So there's really zero background. If we wait just a little bit of time, the circulation is cleared of the bubbles. They fizzle, so to speak. And so the bubbles are only in the tumor. That makes your therapy much more specific. We also are not really attached to HIFU. I think HIFU is great, but it requires lots of costly instrumentation. So a lot of the work that we're trying to do in terms of the therapeutic side, we're using sort of off-the-shelf therapeutic ultrasound units, which are unfocused, but they have enough energy to implode these bubbles. These are physical therapy units that anyone can buy for $1,000. So it does not, we're trying to make it so that the technology doesn't require any specialized instrumentation and really lowers the bar for the therapy.
I have one comment to your very first comment about radiologists. I'm assuming they're wise investors and not biased investors.
Right, in this setting, I care about my money more than my profit. Anyway, you are looking for a partner to help you get through clinical trials, and obviously for any drug development or device development, the clinical trial is the game. So help me understand a little bit about what you anticipate these trials to look like, what your pivotal trial is going to look like, and what you think your biggest challenges are going to be in completing these trials on schedule.
Sure, those are excellent questions. So there is a bit of a precedent set with the BR55 targeted microbubble from Bracco, and their initial clinical trial involved patients who were to undergo a prostatectomy. So I think it makes a lot of sense to do something very similar, where we would take patients who were already going to be undergoing a prostatectomy, inject our bubbles, acquire the ultrasound images, and then see if the site of the tumor matches what's actually in the prostate upon gross pathology. So I think that would be the easiest and the most straightforward trial to show the sensitivity and specificity of detection of these tumors in patients.
Yeah, so the way trials are starting to happen, at least for small biotech startup companies, as we are that have nothing but debt, is to minimize cost, but to also maximize the value of the studies. And so there's a company in the Netherlands, Accelerex, that has a CRO that's totally devoted to targeted fluorescent imaging agents, but their point is only to put them in and validate target engagement. And once you validate target engagement, the inflection point of the value of that technology goes way up. So you might not be doing image-guided surgery as your first clinical trial, but you're demonstrating that you engage with the target and it will work the way that you think. And a similar approach here, I think, is what Agata outlined.
So you're asking for funding for a clinical trial, which obviously I think you pointed out is 4 years away. And so when we're sitting here thinking about what the return on our investment is going to be, what is it that you anticipate? When do you see the return on investment happening? And once you consider it as part of the question, I think you mentioned that you have a U.S. patent. Is that a patent pending, or is it actually a granted patent?
It's a granted patent,
Okay.
so we have several.
And so this is not a U.S. only problem. And so has there been kind of global protections that you've sought, and is that part of the ROI that we're looking at as well? So you could take all of that in one chunk, hopefully.
Yeah, so we did seek global protection for the PSMA nanobubble, or at least European protection. I cannot speak to 100% to global.
In Japan.
In Japan, okay. Thank you. And I already forgot yes. So what we're asking for is an investment for getting to the clinical trial, right? So the things that we need to do are cGMP manufacturing of the formulation, and we need to do GLP toxicology studies. Those are the two really big price tag items that as a small startup we cannot afford to do, even with SBIR funding, for which we are applying. So really it's the intermediate steps within the 3 years to get the data so we can file the IND so that we can do the clinical trial.
So the value inflection point would be to come out with clean tox studies and get a positive IND application, acceptance of the IND. Then we have to do another tranche to do the phase 1, phase 2 trials. The patents are very interesting. So we've each invented a portion of it and then combined it. So the PSMA ligand has been patented and issued. I believe the nanobubbles are patented and issued. And then the combination of the two has been patented and is in process. It's no longer a provisional. And they are worldwide, as much of the world as we could afford.
Yeah, my question is also kind of related to the timeline. Is there anything to do to speed up these toxicology to get closer to the clinical trial, the IND and the clinical trial more quickly?
We've worked on this for some time. So in our lab, being an engineer, I have all of these practicalities in mind, like storage and dissemination and quality control. So we've already been in the background working with all of this with the nanobubble. And we've done non-GLP toxicology with the CRO as much as we could afford through the culture program, which funded a lot of this work. And so really we can scale up in the lab. We're ready to hit the ground running, so to speak, to to get these tox studies done. Like I would imagine there's not a long time between that. We do, sorry, go ahead, Jim. No.
The hurdle is money.
Yeah, pretty much.
All right, well, thank you very much to our team from Case Western Reserve, and we are now going to call up our third pitch from Dr. Edwin sorry, I promised him I wouldn't mess up his name, Baldelomar. Thank you, you can give a round of applause. Dr. Baldelomar is from Washington University, and take it away.
Hi, thank you very much for having me today. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you. So I'm Edwin Baldelomar with XM Biotechnologies, and we are developing novel imaging tools for the early detection of kidney disease because kidney disease burdens a significant portion of our global population. Our strategy is through the direct detection of the nephrons, the primary functioning unit in the kidney, which range from several hundred thousands to millions per individual. Chronic kidney disease is a progressive disease, meaning without detection or intervention, CKD progresses to kidney failure, where their only treatment is kidney transplantation. Current clinical tools to assess kidney function and health fail to recognize the early onset and early progression of kidney disease. Patient populations such as those with hypertension and diabetes, a cardiovascular disease, all have a high risk for chronic kidney disease, but there is no way to know where in progression they are. There is a strong case for nephron number as a clinical metric for detecting CKD and monitoring CKD progression. Barry Brenner first outlined this connection between nephron number and susceptibility to CKD in the late 80s. Since then, numerous studies have been performed showing the connection between nephron number and chronic kidney and susceptibility to chronic kidney disease. Most recently, in a study shown in the New England Journal of Medicine, using biopsy to estimate nephron number in a large patient population study. We followed up this study to see if biopsy can be used in individuals and found that biopsy is too variable to be used as estimating nephron number in individuals. 10 years ago, we developed the first and still only tool to directly detect nephron number in vivo in the kidney. This technology is based on a targeted contrast agent, imaging processes, and analytical software. Each of these have national phase patents and PCTs in place at each of these stages, and we have exclusive licensing agreements at WashU for these technologies. This technology was originally developed for MRI, but to push this technology toward use in humans, we developed an analog using positron emission tomography so we can reduce the dose required to trace doses injected into the body, which further supports its potential for safe use in humans. Additionally, the contrast agent is also based on a protein that is currently used in a clinical trial for vaccine enhancement. Our pathway to commercialization is based on 2 stages, building blocks. The second stage built on the first, where we will be evaluating transplant deceased donor kidneys and improving evaluation, then broadening to a diagnostic screening and monitoring in sensitive populations to CKD. We chose our initial market, transplant evaluation, because there is a dire need for improved ways to assess kidneys for transplantation. We also already have accessibility in this area, as we are currently performing numerous studies and have published numerous studies in using deceased donor kidneys as if they were en route for transplantation. This technology this initial area also allows us to gain market experience and to validate safety and efficacy of this technology. Oh, wow. Sorry, slide's missing. So we estimated that this initial transplant market to be in the tens of millions of dollars, and it will grow and significantly grow larger as we as we transition from adapting this technology to monitoring kidneys after they are transplanted. And then our long-term diagnostic screening monitoring is a multi-billion-dollar market into diabetic patients alone, and a billion-dollar market into other sensitive populations as well. So we have identified a pathway for full IND application of this technology. The initial phase is to create a human recombinant form, which we've already done of this of our contrast agent, and scale the synthesis for for clinical studies. Then the next is doing proof of concept studies in animals with the humanized agents, followed by full toxicity studies in animals, and that will lead to leveraging the FDA's exploratory IND to do a phase 0 clinical trial in humans. We already acquired a STTR and funding for these first 2 phases, and we are asking for your support to complete this 4th and final phase. Thank you very much, and I'll now take your questions.
Thank you. You've certainly tackled a big, hairy problem, and I applaud you for that. I think this is fabulous. I'm going to keep my question simple. Your definition of the market, I don't think, is real. You're defining the disease market, which is not necessarily the number of people that can afford to go get a PET scan every year that is currently not funded by any mechanism that we know. If it were cancer, at least there'd be a mechanism to fund that in terms of getting the study. But now there's currently no one that's going to pay to get a PET scan screening otherwise normal patients or seemingly normal patients. How do you want to get around that problem? Because the market isn't how many people have the disease, it's how many people are going to get this therapy or this approach for diagnosis.
Sure, that's a great question. If I understand it, there are PCT codes that are already in place for abdominal scans and that are used for different types of PET imaging in the abdomen, and where kidneys would fall in line with that. So based on guidance, we've sought that this would be reimbursable, and that the cost to produce the agent and where it would come from would be a factor that could be still make revenue, and I think would address that issue.
Yeah, there's a little difference between reimbursable, that is, there's a pathway to reimbursement, and something that would be pre-certified and allowable by most insurance companies, and I think probably not. But I just want to probe a little bit further, because, you know, I get the idea that you're creating a biomarker that's going to help measure nephron density, which is important. I still don't understand who you propose actually gets this test.
Sure. So this initially we will perform this test in deceased donor kidneys en route as in our first stage of the building block, and to improve allocation. So currently there are 20,000 kidney transplants procedures performed a year, and we believe we can add an additional 1,500 to that market, and then additionally into our second stage, where we are using as a screening tool for sensitive populations, those with hypertension, those with diabetes. Diabetes is our primary target because of the high risk with chronic kidney disease. Assuming compliance and half compliance and accessibility, even 10% would be, I think, a fair estimate, which would still be $1 billion.
So your
market.
first play is to take kidneys because of conservative assumptions that wouldn't be transplanted and make them eligible for transplant, showing they're more viable than they've been felt to believe.
Correct. So,
Okay.
Yeah.
Complicated set of trials to get there, but I understand.
So my questions are, as you move forward, what is the thinking in terms of the pricing model? And on top of that, what is the cost of the technology?
Sure. We've identified on 2 scenarios and what would it cost for, if a center had to acquire a PET center, but we researched, and over 80% of transplant centers where kidney transplants are performed already have PET CTs in place. So, and that's a conservative calculation and direct measurement based on sampling hospitals. So based on selling kits of the contrast agent, and then as well as use of the software for our detection software, that we would be able to have a price that would be well within the range of what we found to be analogous reimbursements. And then for your second question, I'm not sure, is there a second part of the question maybe perhaps I missed?
Well, it was more, what's the pricing model? So is it a site license? Is it an annual subscription? What is the model that you guys are planning on using?
Sure. I mean, we will be selling kits of the contrast agent, and then additionally use of the software for detection of the images afterwards.
And what is the cost to manufacture each kit?
In the range of about $15, I think was approximate, once you scale up synthesis and develop all $15, I'd say.
And so what do you plan on pricing that at to the, either the insurance carrier or the hospital? If it cost you $15 to make, what is the thought in terms of pricing?
Initially analogous specialized PET are priced at around $1,000, and that's where we initially intend to start with this. And then we believe that this can grow to the potential we believe, it could go down to where generic, say FDG, gets priced at, which is in the scale of hundreds of dollars.
Can you talk a little bit about the workflow of doing the scan on these livers for transplant evaluation and how that would affect the timing of the transplant itself?
Sure, it would be kidneys actually. So so that's a great question. Kidneys are pretty much the longest lasting organs, as far as the internal bodies for one of the longest lasting, and so the workflow is that. As we have worked with in St. Louis a centralized organ procurement network that would have a PET CT scanner on campus, all organs end up from this local area, go through that centralized area, then get a scan as they are also being called out and for assessment. Similarly, I think the information would be put on the uploaded to the same site where, say, biopsy results or other lab results would be shown, and that would be additional information they would be able to share to the surgeon or to the nephrologist on the viability and quality of the kidney.
So the diagnostic screening market is a much larger market. How do you think about the competitive landscape there, especially in terms of competing technology and how this would kind of stack up? Sure.
So currently, no one is detecting, the scale of kidney function that this is detecting. Competitive would be, say, transdermal GFR measurements, and those still significantly do not detect the changes that are occurring to the microstructure, and as your kidney has the ability to adapt, those changes are not reflected. Those changes to microstructure are not reflected in those tests, and so the competitive landscape is fortunately for us very minimal. There are other imaging modalities that are trying to detect other areas of the kidney at the surface level, but as we see from biopsy, sparse sampling, especially in a place like the kidney where the heterogeneity of pathology is extremely great through it all. So I think that would be my response.
One last question. To follow up what Dr. Schnall said, are you expecting to find people that seemingly are normal and have disease that otherwise wasn't suspected, or are you expecting to find people that other tests say are abnormal and you're going to say, no, they're better than we thought?
Sure. In the diagnostic screening, is this what you're referring to, the diagnostic screening test?
However you're going to test these people, yes, screening for one, but also for the donors.
Sure. as the number of nephrons change between individuals, there's a strong correlation on how those have either reduced by whether a person is born with less nephrons or whether they have been reduced over time. And so if I understand your question correctly, we would be providing information on the functioning nephrons remaining in the kidney, as well as dynamic information on that is going on in real time on kidney function.
If I were to donate a kidney and my eGFR were 59, you would turn me down under any circumstances, age and everything matched.
So-
If your test revealed that it's actually the equivalent of 65, I would qualify. So that's what I'm trying to get at, what Mitch was asking.
So if I understand this, we published papers that have shown that kidneys that have equivalent GFRs could have a 50% reduction in nephron mass, and one could have extreme pathology while the other could be perfectly normal, but it's not reflected in the GFR. So we would identify that, and these are healthy GFRs. We have shown that you want this kidney A that had a healthy GFR and a full functioning nephron mass should be good to go, but this other one that had a similar GFR but a significantly reduced nephron mass should be red lighted.
Okay, but that's where my conflict is, because in my listening to your story, it's the reverse of what you were saying, and that's why I was confused.
No, okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for helping me clarify that.
All right, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
If each of the presenters could come up front here and just wait on the side, because what we're going to do is take some questions from the audience for the presenters while the panel here puts its scores in and gets that all tabulated. So if you do have any questions, please, I think the microphone is there in the center of the room. Please feel free to come on up and ask questions, and the presenters will take them while we are judging.
I just had a question on the Emory group.
Everyone should be getting.
So first of all, congratulations. I think it's a really difficult area to get the follow-up, but we've found that getting to the ordering physician, that last mile is really a huge part of the problem. Often the specialist or the ED person wants it to be the PCP, if there's a PCP, and if there is no PCP, then that's a problem. And if it is the PCP, then they want to know, what does the specialist think? And so this linearity that you've automated isn't really the problem that we face. It's a much more complex. And the second part of that is even getting to that first person and getting the first order. If you use lung cancer screening as an example, there's serial follow-up required. And so tracking that longitudinally, not just in the instance, is a second problem. So I'm not being critical, just wonder what your thoughts are on the ordering physician not necessarily being the right person, and secondly, how to engage longitudinally. And third, maybe, where do you think of engaging the patient directly in all of this? So I guess I am being critical. I want to correct that, but in a constructive way, I hope. Thank you.
No, thank you for the question.
And sorry, just for the presenters, please make sure you're speaking in the microphone, because the live stream can't hear you if you're not speaking directly into the microphone.
No, those are great questions. Thank you so much. So the first thing, one of the ways that we were trying to address this is if it does go through an electronic medical record, at least, I don't want to use a vendor, but let's just say in one specific vendor that we use, you're able to either order a consult, for instance, if you need it to go to if you're not a specialist, it needs to go to a specialist, and it's with the click of a button, or you're able to forward the result to a known, if you're like, oh, that patient sees Dr. X, oh, actually, that's a real doctor at Emory. Anyway, it doesn't matter. If you want to see Dr. Y, and he's their urologist, you can forward the result, because you may have gotten it for another reason. The ER is a great example of this. They're never following their patients, and for very good reason. That's not a critique. So they have to, lots of hospitals, including Emory, have a system in place that allows the ER to get this and get it to a PCP if they don't have one, or to be put out and sent on file to the PCP or specialist that we have on file. So that's one thing. I believe the second part you were saying, the third part was patient. This longitudinal. So that's what, so sorry, this may not have come across because I may have gotten a little too technical. We are scanning the actual messages. We're not actually, yes, we scan the radiology reports to find the follow-up, but we're actually looking at the messages that are going back and forth. So if you get put in a lung cancer screening system and they say, hey, you need a follow-up in 6 months, our report is the first message that says 6 months. We're now scanning to see if someone orders it. That's a different message. If you're not ordering it, we're following up saying, please do this. If you do, we've already scanned it. We know that. We're not bothering you. If then, when we result on that 6-month follow-up, we're scanning that too to know it got done. If we have another follow-up, boom, you'll get another, it'll go back into the system. For things like lung cancer screening, there will always be a follow-up unless they finally say, hey, you're 20 years out, you're a smoker, you're out, you're done. So in that case, we are longitudinal. In fact, we haven't instituted it yet, but one of the things we can use this for is screening. So if you know that you need a mammogram every year, we can have that set to say this person needs a mammogram every year. And if we don't get that order message, that ORM, to say you were ordered, we'll follow up and go, why not? You might say, oh, she moved. She decided to go to another place. Okay, that's perfect. But if she's still around, we want you to come back to us to get your care. So we are longitudinal. And I apologize, it didn't come across in our quick pitch. And as for the patient, we absolutely agree. Emory has now instituted radiology results go out immediately now. As soon as my 3 minutes oops cue goes away, in case I can correct a mistake, it's going to the patient as well as going to the doctor. I do believe there's a whole space which is not related to us to making a radiology report simpler for the user, or for the patient in this case. But we do agree that going to a patient is acceptable if we have a way to contact the patient, but we would not immediately do that without the consent of the actual care institution. Now, with the Cures Act and saying that the patient should have access to that, we agree. And we would be very happy to have this go to the patient portal. Or if the patient doesn't have a patient portal, or the institution doesn't have a patient portal, a form of contact on file for that patient.
Do we have any other questions from anyone in the audience? Do someone else come on forward? Well, let's make sure we get from the floor first, and then we can take from the panelists.
Did you have a follow-up, sir? Did you have a follow-up?
Hey, hopefully this will be a quick one. This is for the contrast ultrasound for prostate lesions. So our urologists do MRI fusion ultrasound biopsy, so this will be definitely helpful for them to localize lesions. My question is, I don't know if all the endoluminal probes have the contrast technology. I think right now it's there in all the transabdominal probes. So do you think that would be so you would obviously need an ultrasound technology, right, for this study? So would that be kind of a limitation, or you'd wait for the technology to come up?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question. I know that most do have endocavity transducers that are enabled for contrast or capable of contrast. So oftentimes it's just a very easy switch, or turning on the contrast mode if there wasn't one previously. So it's not a hardware problem, it's mostly a software problem.
Are there any other questions from the floor?
I just found what you were talking about very interesting, and I was wondering, have you communicated to perhaps the Cancer Center to help bring patients into clinical trials from the results that are repetitive and followed up?
So, no, that's a great question. So we haven't started it yet because we are in the beginning phase, but that is another place. Like I said, we haven't customized the messages that close the loop. Like, the whole point for us is we want to close the loop, right? And so in your case is we can have it set up. So for instance, it is a law that you should be able to get a mammogram no matter what you want, even if you have a PCP, but most electronic medical records require a PCP in order to get an order. So there are ways to bypass that, to say, hey, we're going to give you something, and then the system behind the scenes helps find you one. It's the same thing here. So if you come in, let's say you're in the ER and you're 26 years old and you happen to have some right lower quadrant pain and they think it's appendicitis and it turns out to be a neuroendocrine tumor of the appendix, well, you may not have a PCP because you're 26. You most certainly don't have an oncologist. I hope not anyway. And so one of the things we can do is we can customize the message inside the system to say, let's get them into the correct network. At that point, you're going to need a surgical oncologist. You're going to need a right hemicolectomy. Depending on what else we find, you may need a hematology oncologist, hopefully not a radiation oncologist.
I'd also like to add, so I think part of your question is getting at what our functionality, so what we can do with our NLP and with our AI, regarding clinical trials, as you said. So one of the things that we can do is it just requires plugging in a different deep neural net. So our deep neural nets, right now we have several. We have for pneumonia resolution, for pulmonary nodules, we have for procedures and for clinic visits. And each of those were selected for a very specific reason. So pulmonary nodules, because that's an ACR quality requirement. Pneumonia resolution, because that's really fast turnaround, high volume, and we wanted to show we could do it. And then finally, clinic visits and procedures, because nobody else can. So we wanted to show, hey, nobody else can do this, we can do it. But to your point about can we find patients from a different, like for something else, so for clinical trials, to recruit them to those trials, the answer is yes, with a different neural net, which takes about 60 hours to develop.
So thank you for all the questions. At this point, while the scores are being tallied still, what we thought we would do is have each of the panelists give one or 2 points of kind of learning from what we've seen in these pitches to explain what we found to be beneficial or could be worked on better, so that from the perspective of how do you plan on pitching in the future, people who are in the audience can learn what we found to be useful and what they can incorporate into their own pitches. So I'll start with my 2 and then I'll certainly pass it down the line. The first is for the pitchers. Always remember that you're presenting to get money, right? You're not presenting to your colleagues. You're not presenting a research paper. You're not presenting at a conference to try and extol the virtues necessarily or where the background of your technology comes from. The goal is to explain quickly the benefits of the technology and how you can make money off of it. And that may seem crude because a lot of times we think in radiology and these conferences that we're here to improve the human condition. But at the end of the day, if you're pitching to VCs, they're gonna wanna know where the ROI is on the money that they're investing. And the second thing I would say is that when you are asked questions, to make sure your answers are super short and super to the point. There's not really a benefit of meandering around. It's not a benefit to get lots of talking points in. The goal is to answer directly the questions because that will invite further questions from the panel and that will engage in more interest in what you are discussing. So those would be my 2 takeaways.
Thanks. I want to say really appreciated all the pictures. It was really clear that you were knowledgeable and have a lot of expertise. My point would be around tone and just to be have a balance of being formal but also conversational. You really need to be having a discussion, not necessarily lecturing.
Thanks all for the presentation. I was really impressed today. I think one of the things that I was impressed by was framing up the problem. There's a lot of problems in healthcare, and I think that was really clear throughout all of the presentations. One thing to think about too is just the value proposition to each of the stakeholders, not only the immediate customer or end user. How will they create barriers to adoption? And thinking that through. I think sometimes there's definitely problems that are out there that have a lot of uphill battle, but are definitely worth the challenge. But having that awareness and being able to explain how you're going to build a business to address those challenges is something to think about.
Thanks. I couldn't concur more with what's been said. These were great topics that you all 3 have challenged us to think about. End-to-end solutions that really can affect an outcome for patients and for populations of patients. However, when you're presenting to people, I think Susan really hit on it. Lecturing is the last thing you want to do. You will lose the audience in 30 seconds, and that would be a long time to keep the audience, frankly. So I think that's important to remember that you're trying to get money from people, you want to engage them, you want to be casual, you want to be, you don't want to brag or be arrogant, and none of you were, but you need to be a little bit more casual than you were, I think, going forward. And when somebody asks you a question, even though I tried to put on a somewhat attacking tone in order to make it sound like it would happen, most of the time you shouldn't take it as an attack. It's just somebody's trying to get to the root of the question, and if you take it personal and try to give them a lecture back, that really defeats the purpose. So that's what I would say. Oh, you don't need that, you need the microphone.
So I would just echo, brevity is important. I would be as concise and on point as you can be. I think that's a critical part of the engagement. I also want to echo one of the things I was going to mention is to the idea of balance. And you all know some of the pitfalls you face and some of the challenges you face, and I would put them right out there. I would say this is where we see the challenge, and because there are challenges in everything that everybody's doing, and I think that helps be able to present the balance.
All right, any other questions from the floor? All right, well, if in that case, it'll be my honor to present the 6th annual Shark Tank Victory 2. And for those who, it is a shark with a briefcase, and there's your victory this year. As Renee mentioned, we're looking in funding for future years. But as a reminder, this is not a judgment on which of the ideas is the best idea or most likely to, be a success. This is really just a reward for the pitch itself and what we felt about the pitchers. And so the award this year goes to Dr. McKeeva and Dr. Harry from Emory University. Congratulations.